As mostly an outsider, albeit a curious outsider, I find the Touhou community and discourse weird. Not weird in that the people involved with it are weird. I'm sure some are, but there are weird people involved with basically every gaming community. But that the community as a whole is completely different from any other gaming community that I've encountered. Sure, some communities have quirks and the like, but there's nothing similar to the community I've seen behind Touhou. It's weirdly isolated from the rest of gaming as a whole, yet there's little holes that peek through that facade of isolation that show themselves in the background of many things. It's weirdly popular, yet not at the same time. It's kind of a Schrodinger's community in that sense. Some may say it has a cult following, but honestly, I don't think that label describes the community perfectly. It isn't like any other cult following that I've heard of. Let's start with me myself. Since while I claim to be an outsider at the start of this, I should clarify where my perspective actually stands, since I'm probably less of an outsider than most people that I know. Most of my exposure to the Touhou community has only really come from one source. The Super Mario 64 ROM hack community, which I'm quite involved with, is very intertwined with the Touhou community. It's the only community that I know that is like this. It by far intersects and interacts with the Touhou community the most. Maybe there's some obscure community that intersects with it much more, but I don't know of it. No other outside community that I've been involved with has had more references to Touhou than the SM64 ROM hack community, and it's not even close. Almost every single Kaizo hack that releases nowadays has at least one Touhou port. It's practically a requirement. As well, there are many hacks that directly and clearly reference Touhou in some capacity, including most Star Revenge hacks, the Shining Star series, and more. Also, many of the people who often play SM64 hacks also play Touhou games often. It makes a very significant portion of the people involved with the community. As for my involvement, it isn't much. I've listened to certain songs from time to time, although mostly through the SM64 sound font. Besides that, most of my involvement is due to interacting with multiple members of the community through the medium of SM64. The Touhou community is one of the strangest communities of any game series that I know of. For starters, and I know part of this is almost certainly due to confirmation and sampling bias, but the Touhou community has possibly the highest proportions of superfans of any community that I know of. Superfans, a vague term that I kind of just fabricated a definition for, are people who are so involved with a community that it becomes part of their identity. When you are a superfan in the community, generally it means that part of you is associated with that community, to the point where people who know you, who are unassociated with the community, might think of you when hearing about the community. Most people are superfans of some things. I, for example, would currently describe myself as a superfan in the SM64 ROM hack community, as well as the map game community, Europa Universalis, Crusader Kings, etc. In the SM64 ROM hack community, I've made several hacks, spent many hours working on hosting events, just for fun, and I've speedrun hacks often. In the map game community, I've spent over 5,000 hours playing map games, with over 4,000 of those being as Europa Universalis 4. I'm not a prominent member of the map game community, unlike the SM64 ROM hack community, but I'd still say I'm a super fan of both, because of the impact both have had on my personal identity. As I mentioned though, the Touhou community seems filled with superfans, at least from an outside perspective. Out of people that I hear talking about Touhou, most of them are either superfans or haven't played Touhou at all. To be honest, I can't think of anyone who I know who's played a few Touhou games, casually enjoyed them, but who I wouldn't consider a superfan. I know there's confirmation bias obviously, since I'd obviously recognize a superfan as someone who's played Touhou more than this hypothetical person. But there's not many series as big as Touhou where I can't think of a casual fan that I know. Most of the series that do fit this case, I don't know any fans of, super or casual. Even with all the biases, also partially due to being in community with many Touhou fans. It's interesting how many people even outside of the SM64 community, base much of their online identities on the series. How many people I've seen with distinctly Touhou profile pictures, and etc. One other thing I've noticed about Touhou is how little it is mentioned in most places, especially for the size of the community. I can't think of any other communities or game series the size of Touhou's that don't get talked about much, at least in a wider gaming sphere. I'd say right now is where I mentioned that I'm referring to the English language communities of everything that I refer to, as that is the language that I speak. I figure everything might be different in different countries, so I figured I should mention this. To give an example, one of the few things about Touhou I've noticed outside of the SM64 ROM hacking community is a mod for Europa Universalis 4 called Touhou Universalis. From a glance, I haven't really played much of the mod myself, honestly. It seems to have a lot of flavorful content, and it seems to be very high quality. Higher quality than all but the biggest mods in Europa Universalis. I mention this because I watch a lot of Europa Universalis content, and I've never seen the mod featured by any channel I watch, and when I looked it up, I couldn't find any videos from a channel I don't watch either. The only videos I could find about the mod on YouTube have only like a few thousand views maximum. This is especially weird considering I couldn't think of any other mods of its size and quality that haven't been showcased in at least one major Europa Universalis YouTuber video. Another example. I looked up Touhou on most of the bigger gaming channels I watch on YouTube, some of which talk about most major games that get released, some which focus on Nintendo and some which mostly focus on PC games, and so I just watch for the fun of it. Out of all the channels I searched, and most of these channels upload pretty often for the most part, I could only find 2 videos which explicitly mention Touhou. To me, it's a bit strange that both videos specifically talked about fan games, although it makes sense given the amount of fan games that people involved with the community have made. Also, I'd like to note that the first video seems to be mainly about Castlevania. In the second video, the comment section was very surprised that they were even talking about Touhou at all. In terms about videos that I personally remember watching, I can only remember 2 as well. The first is from a music theory channel, which discusses music theory concepts relating to video games. I've only watched a few of their videos, as I wasn't too interested, but I'm certain the only reason I remember that the channel exists at all is specifically because of the Touhou video, as I was surprised that they even decided to make the video, even though the series is very well known for its music. The second video, I only remember because I watched it fairly recently as I was rewatching a lot of DanoOx 1's videos, and it's mainly about the ransomware that requires you to play Touhou, because it's a weird malware thing and that's what his channel is about. I find it kinda telling that both of these videos are from non-gaming creators, because in my eyes it showcases the weird stigma against talking about Touhou that it seems to exist in the gaming space. I find all of this very strange though, because of the large size and nature of the Touhou community, as well as its age and influence upon the internet as a whole. From what I can tell, the Touhou fan community is one of the most prolific fan communities that exist, and the amount of and scale of many of these fan projects is stupendous. The only communities that I can think of that rival the Touhou community in size and scale in this regard is the broader Mario community and Pokemon communities. And these communities are based around multi-billion-dollar multimedia franchises which were so influential to gaming and society at large in that Mario itself saved the console gaming industry from the big game crash, along with defining multiple entire genres of games, and Pokemon was such a success that it partially defined the late 90s and early 2000s. That Touhou can compete with these two in anything is mind-boggling. I've heard the argument from some fans that the fan content about Touhou are more influential and known than the actual series of mainline games themselves. Not only this, but Touhou is weirdly wide-reaching, to the point where if I ask an average internet user about Touhou, they'll have a good chance of knowing what it is, even if there's a low chance they've ever interacted beyond that. Even if they don't know what it is, if I mention the next 2 things, there's a very good chance that they'll have heard of them. I'll mention Ronald McDonald first, as it's less influential. However, in the early mid-2010s, Ronald McDonald was one of the most influential and widespread memes of the time. It's telling that it is still one of the most top results when searching Ronald McDonald, which seems ridiculous, but the internet is a ridiculous place. Now, As for the other one, where do I even begin with Bad Apple? I think I should just mention that Bad Apple and its associated music video are so famous that Bad Apple's music video is the test for seeing if a silly idea for a computer's display works. Just like how running Doom is the test for if a silly computer idea will work. That alone should tell you how influential Bad Apple is on internet culture. So far, I've tried to describe things as I've seen them, and I've tried to refrain from in-depth analysis. But as an outsider, I feel uniquely poised to comment on certain things specifically regarding the Touhou community's relationship with the wider gaming world. It feels wrong to me that Touhou as a series is relegated to sit on a bench while all the other kids go and play recess. I've avoided mentioning this until now, but at least from my point of view, there's definitely a stigma against Touhou, especially throughout the wider gaming community. Even more so, in my opinion, than in other Japanese-inspired series. I understand why some specific YouTubers and the like might avoid talking about Touhou, due to it not meshing well with their target audience. However, it seems especially strange to me that there are only 2 videos from major gaming channels that I watched that were at least partially about Touhou, especially given its age and popularity as a series, and how wide-ranging, in terms of the games they talked about, some of the channels that I checked were. It also surprises me that no major Europa Universalis YouTuber has ever talked about Touhou Universalis, given that someone seems to cover just about every single major, and even most minor mods that get released for the game. Even most major Japanese-inspired series-based mods usually get some spotlight, even if it is mostly ironic. Touhou Universalis is basically the only exception I can think of, and the only reason I can think of is due to the stigma against Touhou in particular. The best way I can explain what the stigma exactly is by showing a comment I found while researching for this video. First, a quick rebuttal to this kind of thinking, because I feel like it's necessary. Number 1. Baby Peach is an underage child. What the hell is wrong with having underage children in your media franchise as long as you don't sexualize them? 2. I won't ever claim to understand how Touhou biology works. I've heard people try to explain it and it is very confusing. But as far as I can tell, most of the characters in Touhou are adults. Number 3. Compared to other Japanese-inspired series, the characters in Touhou are very non-sexualized. Sure, fanart might depict them as otherwise, but that's true about everything. Rule 44. The main reason I chose this comment in particular, however, is to showcase how irrational and weird our human stigmas can be, and how these stigmas can affect our decisions, even to someone who is completely aware of the stigma. I'm sure for many people, even ardent fans, Touhou doesn't pass the turn off the TV if someone walks in the room test, popularized by Scott the Woz. I wonder how many people I know have played Touhou but would never tell me. I honestly have no clue. Either way, I think that the social anxiety created by having to talk about Touhou, for some people, is not worth the trade-off. I can understand why. Imagine if your brother, or whoever, walks in the room and is like the asshole I showed off above. That's a really difficult situation to deal with. At the same time though, I feel like this contributes significantly to the stigma against it. When you turn off the TV, it reinforces a stigma that caused you to turn off the TV to begin with. It helps imply that the stigma against Touhou is justified, and that it is something to hide, when it really isn't, at least for most people. It helps justify comments like the one above, with no real grounds in reality. I think that there's 3 main reasons why there's a higher density of superfans in the Touhou community, or at least why it seems that way. To me, it seems a combination of the stigma from earlier, the sheer difficulty of the games, and a byproduct of the isolation of the community from the gaming community at large. I think there's a good amount of people casually interested in Touhou, either due to liking shoot 'em ups, due to the lore behind the series, because they like the music, because they're just curious, or many other reasons that people have to like video games. Part of the reason why there might seem to be a high density of superfans in the Touhou community, at least from an outsider's perspective, is that some casual fans might feel anxious about talking about the games due to the aforementioned stigma. This might be contributing to the perceived lack of casual fans of the series that other series have, at least to outsiders like me. It's no secret that the Touhou games are brutally difficult. To be honest, I think brutally difficult might be a huge understatement. I feel like it's one of the most known details about the games themselves, and I feel like it might be one of the factors leading into why there's a high density of superfans. To be specific, I feel like the game's difficulty means that most people who play the games probably put in quite a bit of time into the games, and this leads to a higher proportion than normal becoming superfans. I'll compare this to Europa Universalis 4, a game I'm a lot more familiar with, in that in most communities in the game, everyone you're speaking to probably has hundreds, if not thousands of hours in the game, as that's the amount of time it takes to get a good understanding of the game's mechanics and features. However, I still think this is the weakest reason, due to Touhou's thriving fan community, which means that this difficulty problem really only affects the main games, as fan games can have whatever difficulty the creator wants. Even then, most of the main games have difficulty options as far as I'm aware, and so even someone who has no clue what they're doing can still play the games. At last, I think it might also be due to the Touhou community's isolation from the gaming community at large. I think this isolation might have fostered the incredible adoration the community has for the game. Because of this isolation, I feel that many people who find out about the games and the community for the first time might have a deeper appreciation for the games than if they were more mainstream, and the awe of seeing what the community has done, isolated from most of the gaming community, might draw people into getting involved for the community themselves. I'll draw another comparison from my experience with Plock, where, while I might still like Plock and its music, I might not have cared as much about Plock itself, to the point where it's one of my favorite games, if it were more popular. It's weird how seemingly little things like this can warp the mind's viewpoints about something, and in this case I think it's definitely a factor into the high density of superfans. While I'm not personally a fan of the series, I do think that Touhou should still be discussed in general, just like most other gaming series that I know of. I know in the past I've personally avoided discussion of Touhou, and while I was never as extreme as the person I mentioned above, I personally had a weird disgust for the series, which seems wrong in retrospect. It's not like the series has done anything to deserve the disgust I had for it. I've had few negative experiences with its community members, and the games aren't vile and disgusting in of themselves. I feel like most people should talk to other people about this series like they would talk about any other series they were interested in. I know the superfans aren't failing on this point, but I have a sinking feeling there's a large number of casual or silent fans who are anxious on this matter, but, and this point applies to many things in life besides Touhou, unless you have a direct and personal reason to, there's no reason to refrain from talking about topics you care about to your friends, co-workers, siblings, anyone you actually care about. Hell, even your grandma. Okay, maybe you shouldn't introduce Touhou to your grandma. That, unless she was like really into Galaga back in the day. I want to end this video with a story that happened during the production of the video that I couldn't think of a place to fit after the fact. So, later that night, after I was done doing stuff for the day a few days ago, I decided to play some mod in Minecraft because I started the world a few days ago and I wanted to continue working on some stuff in the world. The problem was, the world was on my laptop, which I use on most weekdays, but I prefer playing on my desktop at home. So I had to transfer the world over. While downloading the world, I was in my .minecraft folder, and I noticed a weird looking folder, one that I didn't know the purpose of, and that I hadn't seen in any other mod pack I've ever played before. I opened it up, and there was nothing in it, and I decided to search it up while I was waiting to download my world, because I was just curious what it was. I found a GitHub page for the mod that created the root folder, and I unfortunately decided to open it up. Again, mostly out of curiosity. What I saw ruined the next hour for me out of sheer laughter. It was a f***ing Touhou reference.